Tension thickened the air inside the K-9 unit of the Caldwell Police Department. Officers stood along the training room's walls, arms crossed, eyes glued to the German Shepherd pacing inside the enclosure. Vega wasn't just any K-9, he was stronger, faster, more alert than the rest. But he was also unpredictable, dangerous. He'd already bitten 2 trainers and had nearly mauled a third. His sharp gaze scanned the room, not for threats, but for something he couldn't name. Then the door creaked open. A woman stepped in, holding the hand of a young boy wearing oversized black sunglasses. She looked nervous, as if she already regretted coming. "This is Tommy," she said softly. "My son. He lost his sight when he was 2, but he has a way with animals." Her name was Selene Maddox, and the officers gave her a look that mixed pity and disbelief. Sergeant Cormac Vale scoffed under his breath. "With respect, ma'am, that dog isn't a petting zoo." Captain Rhett Calder, a stern-faced man with 30 years of service behind him, said nothing. He simply nodded, signaling to give the boy a moment. Tommy gently let go of his mother's hand and slowly approached the edge of the training zone. Vega froze. His growling stopped, ears pricked forward. The tension in the room shifted, uncertain, now tinged with disbelief. Tommy extended his small hand, palm out, facing the dog. "Hi, Vega," he said quietly. "I'm Tommy." No commands, no fear, just a whisper in a calm voice. Vega tilted his head. One step, then another. The officers stiffened, ready for the worst. But Vega didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He simply approached and stopped right in front of the boy. Tommy crouched down and gently touched Vega's snout. "You're not angry," he said. "You're just scared like me, aren't you?" Then he leaned forward and whispered something, too soft for anyone else to hear. Whatever it was, Vega immediately sat down, his breathing calm, his posture steady. The wildness in him vanished like a switch had been flipped. Captain Calder took a step closer to Selene. "Your son just did what none of our best trainers could." Selene nodded slowly, eyes glassy. But deep inside, she wasn't just surprised. She was scared, because what just happened wasn't normal. And somewhere in her, she knew this moment would force truths into the open. Truths she had buried long ago. Whatever Tommy whispered to Vega that day, it changed everything. And it was only the beginning. Captain Rhett Calder hadn't slept well that night. He kept replaying the scene in the training room, the way Vega had locked eyes with Tommy, how the chaos inside that dog had simply stopped. Rhett had seen hardened criminals cry less than some of his officers did that evening. But it wasn't just emotion, it was something deeper, something unnatural. And that whisper, the one no one else heard. "What the hell did that boy say?" Rhett muttered to himself as he poured black coffee into his chipped ceramic mug. Across town, Selene Maddox sat at her kitchen table, staring at the floor as Tommy quietly peeled a banana beside her. She hadn't told the police everything. Not yet. She hadn't told them that Tommy sometimes woke up crying in the middle of the night, calling names he shouldn't know. That he'd spoken a few words in German last winter, and she didn't know where he'd heard them. And now Vega, a military-trained dog, broken by war and betrayal, soothed by the voice of a blind child. It scared her more than she cared to admit. Meanwhile, back at the precinct, Sergeant Cormac Vale wasn't impressed. "Coincidence," he grunted, leaning against the wall in the locker room. "That mutt's just broken. The kid got lucky." But Unia Crow, the youngest officer in the K-9 division, wasn't convinced. She had reviewed Vega's footage dozens of times. Every time the dog had faced a human, it ended in aggression, except with Tommy. "I don't think it was luck," she said. "It was recognition. The dog knew something, or someone, in that boy." Selene was called in again the next day. Vega had been refusing to respond to anyone else. No voice commands, no food. He only sat near the kennel gate, eyes darting toward the entrance as if waiting for someone. "Tommy." When the boy entered, Vega immediately stood, tail slightly wagging. Not like a pet, but like a soldier waiting for orders. The officers watched in silence. Rhett didn't interfere this time. He just watched, studied, because now he had questions. After the session, Rhett walked Selene out to her car. "Tell me something, Selene. Did Vega ever belong to your family? Before?" She froze for a beat too long. "No," she answered flatly, but her fingers trembled as she reached for the keys. Rhett noticed. He didn't push further. Yet, that night, Tommy sat on the edge of his bed, fingers tracing the seams of Vega's collar that an officer had left behind by accident. The boy's voice was soft as he whispered into the dark, "I know who you are." And Vega, from miles away in the kennel, lifted his head. 3 days later, Vega's behavior had shifted completely. He no longer barked at passing officers or growled during feeding time. Instead, he sat calmly, staring at the hallway as if expecting someone. The handlers were confused. This was a dog once labeled a liability, now behaving like a model recruit. But only when Tommy was around. Without the boy, Vega returned to that quiet alertness, eyes always watching, waiting. Captain Rhett Calder knew something deeper was at play. He just didn't know what. Selene tried to brush it off as coincidence. He's just calmer now. Maybe the boy gave him something to trust. But Vera Dorn, the child psychologist the department brought in, didn't believe in simple explanations. After a quiet observation session with Tommy, she pulled Rhett aside. "That boy's carrying something," she said. "Grief, yes, but also memory. His emotional language is far beyond his age. Something happened to him, something formative." Back in the precinct's basement archives, Unia Crow was digging. She couldn't stop thinking about Vega's reaction to Tommy. While cross-referencing old K-9 unit deployments, she discovered something strange. Vega had originally been stationed overseas with a private contractor, not with the department as she had assumed. His arrival was tied to a sealed case from 7 years ago, one involving a raid, a missing handler, and a child. Unia didn't have clearance to open it, but she had a sinking feeling that child might have been Tommy. That same night, Vega was taken out for a short walk. A passing officer accidentally dropped a metal baton onto the concrete. The sound was sharp, piercing, harmless to most ears. But Vega snapped. Not violently, but with a jolt of memory. He froze, ears rigid, head turning fast, his eyes wide and empty like he was no longer in the same room. Then he dropped to the ground, low and shaking. It wasn't aggression. It was fear. Tommy, who had just arrived with Selene for a scheduled visit, rushed forward. Without hesitation, he knelt beside Vega and whispered again. It wasn't English. It was something older, harsh, foreign, almost military in tone. Vega stopped shaking. His breathing steadied. Officers nearby stared in stunned silence. Rhett caught Selene's eyes. She looked pale, shaken to her core. "Where did he learn that language?" he asked her quietly. She didn't answer. Later, as night fell, Selene sat alone in the kitchen while Tommy slept. She opened a dusty, sealed envelope from a locked drawer. Inside were 2 photos, one of a man in uniform with Vega by his side, and another of that same man holding baby Tommy. Her hands trembled. The past she buried was clawing its way back. The morning after the baton incident, Captain Rhett Calder stood in his office, holding the printouts Unia Crow had quietly left on his desk. The name on the confidential file glared back at him. Ezren Hol, a former military K-9 handler turned private contractor, presumed dead after a classified operation gone wrong. Officially, no records linked him to the Boston Police Department. Unofficially, Vega had once been his dog. And suddenly, things weren't adding up. Rhett sat back in his chair, the memory of Vega's reaction to Tommy playing on repeat in his mind. What if Vega isn't bonding with the boy? What if he's recognizing him? He muttered. It would explain everything. The obedience, the whispered commands, the foreign language. It wasn't training, it was memory. And if Vega remembered, maybe Tommy did too. Or worse, maybe he never forgot. Back at home, Selene stood in the hallway outside Tommy's room, listening to him hum softly to Vega, who now slept curled up at the foot of his bed. She held the photo tighter in her hand, the one with Ezren smiling, holding their son. She hadn't spoken that name in years. Not since the mission in Syria that changed everything. The official report said Ezren died in an explosion. She had believed it until Vega arrived at the precinct. Now her mind raced with questions she was terrified to ask. Tommy stirred suddenly. "Mom," he called. "Do you know the man with the deep voice?" Her blood turned to ice. She slowly stepped into the room. "What man, baby?" she asked carefully. Tommy tilted his head. "The one who tells Vega what to do. I hear him sometimes. When I sleep." Selene forced a smile, but her stomach twisted. It wasn't just a dream. Her son was remembering something buried. Something she had spent years trying to protect him from. Meanwhile, Unia took a risk and contacted a friend in military intelligence. What she learned left her speechless. Ezren Hol wasn't just a handler. He had once led an off-the-books operation involving child extractions from war zones. He had gone rogue during his final mission. The target, a 2-year-old boy taken from a bombed-out village. No one ever reported the child's identity. Unia began connecting the dots, and each one pointed to Tommy. That night, Rhett sat in his car outside the Maddox house, unsure of what he was about to do. He held a copy of the military file and stared at the name Ezren Hol, printed in bold. The same name Selene had tried so hard to erase from her life. Rhett knew he had to ask her the question she feared most. "Selene, was Ezren Hol Tommy's father?" Selene didn't answer right away. The name had hung in the air between her and Captain Calder like a ghost. Heavy, invisible, and impossible to ignore. She looked down at the envelope in her hands, the photo still inside. Then, quietly, she said it. "Yes, Ezren was Tommy's father." Her voice cracked as the words left her mouth. "But I thought he was dead. For years." Rhett leaned forward in his seat, his tone careful. "Why didn't you tell anyone? Not even when Vega showed up?" Selene stared at the dark street through the window. "Because I was told never to speak his name again," she said. "After the mission failed, a man in uniform came to our door. He said Ezren had gone rogue, that if I talked, they'd come after Tommy. I ran, changed my name, started over." Rhett's expression hardened. "You think they're still watching?" Selene nodded. "I don't know, but when I saw Vega, I knew something was wrong, something unfinished." Meanwhile, Unia Crow stayed late at the precinct, combing through the limited documents she'd gathered. She found a single audio file buried in Vega's original training logs, low quality, warbled by time. But as she listened through headphones, her face went pale. A man's voice barked out a phrase in German, sharp and commanding. It was the same phrase Tommy had whispered during Vega's panic episode. She rewound it again and again. There was no doubt now Tommy had heard that voice before. At home, Tommy stood at the back door with Vega, fingers brushing lightly over the dog's collar. "He's coming back," the boy whispered. Selene, who had just entered the room, froze. "Who's coming back, sweetheart?" Tommy turned his head slightly, as if listening to something far away. "The man who gave Vega his name." Selene dropped the mug in her hand. It shattered, echoing through the quiet kitchen. "Captain Calder called Unia at midnight. I need everything you have on Ezren Hol. We can't keep ignoring this." Unia hesitated. "There's something you need to know," she said. "Ezren, he was never officially declared dead. He disappeared. Off-grid. No body. No funeral. It was a cover-up." Rhett's chest tightened. "You think he's alive?" Unia answered carefully. "I think he never stopped watching." That same night, in a motel off I-95, a man with a scar across his jawline flipped through a file of old photographs. His hand lingered on one. A toddler with jet-black hair, being held by Vega. He traced the boy's face with his finger. "He remembers," Ezren whispered to himself. Outside, the hum of an approaching storm began to rise. The rain hit hard against the roof of the Maddox home that night, thunder rolling in low waves. Selene sat by the window, staring at the empty street. She hadn't told Tommy about Ezren, at least not yet. But deep down, she feared he already knew. Not from words, but from instincts. From memories that never truly faded. Vega sat beside Tommy's bed, alert, ears twitching at every noise outside. He hadn't slept since sunset. Neither had Selene. At the precinct, Unia Crow printed out the last page of a report she wasn't supposed to have. It was a satellite image, blurry but damning. A man stepping out of a black SUV near an abandoned military airstrip just days ago. The facial recognition system flagged a 72% match, Ezren Hol. "He's not dead," she said out loud. And if he was circling back, it wasn't random. He was looking for something, or someone. She texted Captain Calder. "We have a problem." Meanwhile, Rhett Calder was already moving. He stood outside Vega's kennel, watching the dog pace restlessly. "You feel it too, don't you?" he whispered. The old instincts in Rhett were screaming. Everything pointed to a confrontation. But the part that troubled him most wasn't Ezren's return. It was why now. What had changed after all these years? What had triggered his reappearance? The answer, somehow, was in Tommy. Back at the house, Tommy suddenly sat up in bed. "He's here," he said calmly. Selene rushed in, heart racing. "Who, baby?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He pointed to the window. "The man from before. The one with Vega." Selene's breath caught. Then Vega stood, stiff, silent, his body language unmistakable. He remembered, too. Before Selene could react, the doorbell rang. Once, then again. Slow, deliberate. Selene walked toward the door like she was in a dream. She opened it just enough to see. Standing in the rain, soaked and silent, was a man with a jagged scar across his jaw and eyes full of history. Ezren. Alive. Real. Older, but unmistakably him. "Hello, Selene," he said softly. She couldn't breathe. Behind her, Vega let out a low, guttural sound. Not a growl. A sound of mourning. Recognition. Connection. Tommy walked quietly to the hallway, bare feet on the floor, unafraid. He stood just behind his mother. "I knew you'd come back," he said. Ezren's eyes welled up. "I never stopped trying." Selene's hand trembled on the door. This moment, long buried, long feared, was now at their doorstep, and whatever came next would change their lives forever. The air inside the Maddox home felt suspended, like time had stopped the moment Ezren stepped through the door. Selene stood frozen, her fingers still gripping the doorknob. Her mind raced through 1,000 versions of this moment. None prepared her for the real thing. Vega remained still but alert, standing between Ezren and Tommy, as if protecting both. The dog's loyalty was torn, yet his eyes shimmered with something that looked like relief. Ezren looked older, thinner, weathered, but his voice was calm. "I didn't die," he said, barely above a whisper. "They told you I did because I broke the rules, because I took Tommy out of that war zone when I wasn't supposed to." Selene's face hardened. "You left us. You disappeared." Ezren nodded. "I didn't have a choice. After the mission, I was hunted. I had to vanish. I was trying to keep him safe. Keep you safe." Tommy stepped forward slowly, reaching out until his hand brushed against Ezren's coat. "Your voice," he said. "I remember it." Ezren knelt down, eye to eye with the boy. "I used to read to you every night, even when the sirens were close." Selene turned away, her eyes filled with tears. She'd built her life on forgetting, on surviving. And now, all of it was unraveling under the weight of a truth she couldn't avoid. At the precinct, Unia and Captain Calder sat across from a Department of Defense liaison who had arrived without notice. The man wore no name badge, just a black folder marked classified. He slid it across the table. Inside, photos, operation logs, and a list of names, Ezren's included. "This isn't a police matter anymore," the man said coldly. "Ezren Hol is considered a fugitive. If he resurfaces, we'll take custody." Immediately, Calder's jaw clenched. "He's not a threat. He's a father trying to come home." The man didn't blink. "That's not your decision." Back home, Ezren and Selene sat across from each other at the kitchen table while Tommy and Vega rested nearby. "They'll come for me," Ezren said. "They've been watching you. They knew Vega found his way back to me through your precinct. That's why I had to show up now, before they did. Selene's voice shook. You should have told me everything. Ezren looked down. Would you have believed me? Outside, headlights cut through the darkness, pulling up slowly in front of the house. A black SUV. No sirens. No lights. Just silence. Vega stood up instantly, tail rigid, body tense. Ezren's face turned grim. They're here. The knock on the door was soft, but carried the weight of finality. Selene turned to Ezren, her face pale. You need to go. Out the back. But he shook his head. If I run, they'll never stop. I came here to end this. Vega stood between them, eyes fixed on the front door, his body tense, ready. Tommy, still half asleep on the couch, slowly sat up. They're not here for me, he said calmly. They're here for him. Outside, two men in tactical gear stood under the rain, weapons holstered but visible. Captain Rhett Calder stepped out from his own car, having followed the SUV without backup. You don't have to do it this way, he told the agents. The taller one didn't respond. The other handed Calder a folded document. Signed this morning. Federal authority. Ezren Hol is to be taken in alive, if possible. Calder's grip tightened on the paper. He's not a criminal. He's a witness to a cover-up. The agent replied flatly, That's not how Washington sees it. Inside, Selene grabbed Ezren's arm. Let me talk to them. Let me explain. Ezren stopped her. If you open that door, you'll never see me again. Tommy stood beside Vega, his small hand resting on the dog's back. He saved me once. Now it's my turn. Selene looked between them, torn between the past she wanted to forget and the truth standing in her living room. For years, she had silenced Ezren's name to protect her son. Now that silence could cost everything. The door creaked open slowly. Captain Calder stood alone on the porch, eyes locking with Selene's. He's got 30 seconds. That's all I could buy you. Without waiting, Selene turned and whispered something in Tommy's ear. The boy nodded. She then turned to Vega. Go. Vega bolted toward the back door, Ezren following close behind. In seconds, they disappeared into the woods behind Hollow Creek, the same place where Ezren had once taught Vega to track in silence years before. Inside the house, Calder stalled the agents with questions and small talk. But he knew time was running out. One agent scanned the room. Where's the kid? Selene stayed silent. Where's Holt? Calder answered, steady and cold. He's not here. The agent stepped forward. If you're lying, that's obstruction. Calder didn't flinch. Then go get a warrant. Deep in the woods, Ezren and Vega moved like shadows through the rain. Vega suddenly stopped, ears perked, listening. Footsteps, multiple. Flashlights in the distance. Ezren whispered to Vega one last command. The dog vanished into the trees. Ezren stayed behind. Rain soaked through Ezren's jacket as he crouched behind a fallen log deep in Hollow Creek. Flashlights swept across the trees like searchlights, voices calling out in clipped commands. But Ezren didn't move. He knew this terrain better than anyone. Years ago, he'd trained here with Vega back when order still meant something, and when he believed the system he served was just. That belief died the same day the government tried to erase his son. At the edge of the woods, Vega moved silently through the brush, following Selene's whispered order. Find help. Protect him. The dog's instincts had fully returned. Every step was precise, his breathing low. When he reached the old ranger station by the stream, Unia Crow was already there. She had followed Vega's trail against direct orders. She knelt and placed a tracker on his collar. Take me to him, she whispered. Vega turned and bolted back into the trees, leading her into the storm. Back at the house, Tommy sat in the living room, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Selene watched him with unease. You okay? She asked. He nodded slowly. He's scared, but not of them. He's scared he won't see me again. Selene knelt beside him. You might have to be brave for both of you. Tommy touched her hand and said softly. He told me I'm the reason he came back, not to run, to end it. Captain Calder stood at the edge of the woods, trying to delay the agents without openly disobeying them. But his time was up. "You've stalled long enough," one of them growled. "We're moving in." As they advanced into the forest, Vega emerged from the dark, standing directly in their path. One of the agents reached for his weapon. "Don't," Calder warned, stepping between them. "If that dog's here, Ezren's close. And if he wanted to disappear, you wouldn't have found him." Unia arrived moments later, soaked and breathless. "You want Holt? Fine. But you're going to hear what he has to say first." The agent scoffed. "He's a fugitive." Unia stood her ground. "He's a father, a decorated veteran. And the government lied. About the mission. About the boy. You know it. And you're afraid of what happens if that truth comes out." Then, from the trees, Ezren stepped forward with his hands raised. "I won't run," he said, "but I speak first. And you listen." For a moment, the forest held its breath. Then came the voice of a child, soft, steady, clear. "He saved me, just like he saved Vega." The forest was silent after Tommy spoke. Even the agents hesitated. Ezren stood motionless, rain dripping from his hair, his hands still raised. In front of him, Vega didn't move. The dog stood like a statue between his past and his present, between the man who trained him and the child who healed him. "Let me speak," Ezren said, his voice calm but full of weight. "And after that, you can take me wherever you want." Captain Calder nodded toward the agents. "You owe him that much." They exchanged glances, then gave a silent, reluctant nod. Ezren lowered his hands slowly and turned toward Vega. He knelt down, placing his palm on the dog's soaked fur. "They used us, boy. You remember, don't you?" Vega didn't move. "They told me to leave the child, to mark the coordinates and move on. But I didn't. I picked him up, and I ran." At the edge of the forest, Selene and Tommy stood under the porch light, waiting. As the group emerged from the trees, Tommy stepped forward. "I remember your voice," he said again. "From the dreams. From the sound Vega makes when he sleeps." Ezren knelt and opened his arms. Tommy hesitated just for a second, then walked straight into them. The hug was quiet, heavy with years of silence and lost time. Vega sat beside them, pressing his head into both their shoulders. In the days that followed, everything changed. Unia's report went public, backed by Captain Calder and other officers willing to speak the truth. The operation that had been buried for nearly a decade was finally exposed. Ezren was not prosecuted. Instead, he was honorably discharged under review, and the federal warrant was dropped quietly. No headlines, no cameras, just closure for those who needed it. Selene, once terrified of the past, now watched her son bloom in ways she had never imagined. Tommy began working with Vega at the department's K9 center, helping rehabilitate dogs with trauma. "He doesn't train them," Unia said one day. "He listens to them." Vega never left Tommy's side. Where the boy walked, the dog followed. Their bond became legend in the precinct. One morning, as the sun broke through the fog over Hollow Creek, Tommy and Ezren sat on the porch, sipping hot cocoa. "You know what I whispered to him that day?" Tommy asked. Ezren smiled. "What?" The boy leaned closer and whispered again, "Home." And this time they both understood what it meant.